Okay. Afternoon, everybody. Uh, Welcome to the last one of our virtual sessions for Leeds Digital Festival. My name's Kevin Else. I would speak about responding to security questions in tenders. I'm not sure. Hopefully, you should have seen that there is a poll. It just gives a rough idea the number of sort of tenders that you have to respond to. If you wouldn't mind filling that in. And any questions, if you want to just put them in the Q&A, and we'll deal with them as and when we can later. We have a section for questions hopefully later. So basically a very rough agenda. So I'll tell you a little bit about who CSP are, but very brief and to the point. Cover the different type of tender documents that certainly that we get involved in, the type of questions that get asked, and then some example of some of the spreadsheets, etc., that we've come across. So CSP was formed in 2005. Was formed by 4 very experienced freelance security consultants who've done a lot of work in government and private sector. We have doubled in size during that time. We're very proud of the fact that we retain the vast majority of our customers, and they keep coming back to us for more. And basically, we cover security architecture and design, compliance work, governance work, assistance with companies to get certifications, and also, surprise, surprise, help with tenders. So basically, there's 3 main areas of tenders that I'm going to cover, which is government, local government, and commercial tenders. So government tenders, which tend to be through the main government frameworks like G-Cloud or Digital Outcomes or some of the other outcome services, and through the dynamic purchasing frameworks. Vast majority of government work now, for you to bid for it, you have to have a minimum of having Cyber Essentials. In some environments as well, Cyber Essentials Plus. And although the frameworks go through that, you go through a lot of paperwork to get yourself on the frameworks in the first place. And it's meant to be that the suppliers are therefore pre-qualified, you still end up with a huge amount of questions. One of the first questions is always, have you got a security policy? The government ones, though, tend to focus on personal validation. So how do you verify that your staff are who they say they are, that they have the experience level that they have? Sometimes there's a requirement for a level of clearance, but most government environments, normally it's only a basic clearances required, not full security clearance. The questions will reflect whether you are processing the data for that government department or not, or whether you're just providing an external service. So, for example, in a lot of the work that we do with governments, we don't normally have access to live data. So we'll be looking at designs, doing risk assessments of those environments, etc., so that we won't normally be data processors. So local government tenders, we're seeing an increasing amount asking for Cyber Essentials. However, we're also seeing an increasing amount asking for your data protection policy or your GDPR policy. Obviously, that also relates to whether you're actually going to be a data processor for them, but that can be tricky to define. We've seen some situations where even people doing building maintenance and cleaning and things like that for a local government department, they class the fact that you have contact details of somebody at each site as being handling personal data. And surprise, surprise, one of the first questions is, have you got a security policy? With the private sector, guess what? You'll see there's a theme coming through here. One of the first questions is normally, have you got a security policy? So it goes without saying that some form of cybersecurity policy you're going to need in all these environments. The thing is, you can tick the boxes and say, yes, we've got one. They won't necessarily require that document to be sent over as part of the bid process, but I'll guarantee you that somewhere down the line, they will want to see that document. More often in the private sector, you'll see that they will ask for details about your suppliers and how they handle the data, what sort of controls they've got, and what validation you've done on the third-party risk. So, you know, if you're having some data of yours processed outside of your organization, for example, a payroll or whatever, but then that obviously gives details of your personnel. And if those personnel are also working in the private sector, sometimes they can ask for how you make sure that your suppliers have controls. It's also a method of pushing down the security standards down the supply chain. Nearly always in private sector ones, there will be something about data protection, and particularly if you're processing data, they will expect you to have done a data privacy impact assessment, which isn't as horrendous as it sounds, but it's just a method of showing what level of controls you have in place to protect that data and whether you've made sure it's fair and accurate. Excuse me. So some of the very general tips about how to address the questions that you get in there, and some of these will sound very straightforward and you're going to say, oh, of course, but it's useful to remind yourself of these all the time. You answer the question in the same language. If you take the first approach in whatever the question is, of basically saying exactly the same thing. So if the questionnaire says, show what level of maturity in your security that you have within your organization. So if you use the same sort of language to say, we demonstrate the maturity of our security culture within the organization by, and if you start it like that, at least you know you're addressing the question. It's very easy to read the question and go, yes, that's our cybersecurity policy, or that's this policy. And you answer the question by just saying, yes, we have a policy that does this. And that doesn't really answer the meaning behind the question. Use the same terminology. An example I've used in a few sessions like this is we had a situation where a government department had a tender document out. We were applying for it. And one of the standards that they mentioned to say, please show your experience of this standard, was actually out of date and had been replaced by something else. And on that particular one, this was a few years ago, but on that particular one, we thought, well, it's not relevant because it's not in place anymore. So we didn't answer the question of, yes, we have experience of standard X. And we failed on that question because we hadn't mentioned standard X. So rather than saying we have experience of standard X and then adding at the bottom of it, this has now been superseded by standard Y, which would have obviously helped raise a profile. So remember that the first sift of these is very often somebody who does not have an in-depth technical knowledge. They're just ticking off the things that they've been asked for in the questions. And if you don't refer to it, even if you refer to it to say, this is incorrect, it should be something else, at least you've referred to it. So you'll get that tick in the box. A number of the questionnaires are now done online, or through portals or whatever, tender portals. And you get the problem of being limited to, please respond in 50 words. which doesn't really give you a chance to give you that to show the level of experience that your organization or the people that you're putting forward for this can show. There are a few tenders that we've seen where they say, please do not insert links. And fine, I understand that. But where you can get, and where it doesn't mention it, don't be afraid to put in links to your company LinkedIn profile or to your website or a particular page on your website that refers to the service that you're offering. Right? There are, as I say, there are occasions where they're not. You can't put links in, but it normally will tell you in the tender document or in the portal. Read it as soon as possible. What I tend to see with a lot of tenders with people is that it comes in, they address maybe a little part of it and go, yes, can we actually, is that valid business reason for us to tender for this? Are we going to make any money out of it, sort of thing? But once that's happened, very often it gets pushed to the back somewhere, and particularly like the fiddly questions at the back, like cybersecurity. Read it all the way through, because you will get caught out with it says, you know, please provide examples of, and then trying to squeeze examples of a project that you've already done for a similar organization, which, excuse me, my watch telling me I'm dying, I think. You know, you may not answer have time to answer the question with the level of detail that you need, or you may need to pull other people in at short notice. And don't be afraid to ask questions. With nearly all of the tender portals, you have the ability to ask clarification questions almost as soon as the tender comes out. That normally ends about a week before the tender's got to be in. Ask as many questions and clarify things as soon as possible. Don't be afraid to ask questions or for clarifications. They may be using a piece of terminology or an abbreviation that's not known to you or whatever. Don't be afraid to ask. And don't be afraid to point out errors. I mentioned the one about the standard before. We've had tenders, seen tenders where the submission date was 3 weeks in the past. So that, you know, to raise that as soon as possible to make sure it's they're aware that there's been a mistake or a typo somewhere in the document, because it happens. Okay. So some couple of brief examples, and then we can go on to any questions if we've got any. So this is a commercial environment, and it seems quite straightforward. You know, have you got a security policy, and have you got a GDPR policy? Debatable whether they should be using the term GDPR, but never mind. And it points out the fact that, you know, we will not respond to suppliers that do not have a GDPR policy. It can be that yes or no, you're in or out type of response. This particular one asks you to supply it or supply some details. That's not always the case. Very often, they later on in the governance phase of the tender, you'll be asked to supply some of those documents. It's not unusual as well that you'll get just a single tick in the box like that now, and then it will say something like, we will, to people that get through the first pass, we will supply an additional questionnaire, so another spreadsheet as a supplier questionnaire for a bit more details. Now, I apologize if this text is difficult to read, but it gives you an idea of the level of detail that some of the government documents go to. And they obviously cover a lot more areas than just information security. Very often you'll get them mentioned, like this one does right at the top, business continuity planning, or whether legal compliance is required, not just around data protection, whether there's other legal requirements that you have or that they may need you to address. Okay. I mentioned before about verification of employees. So this particular one mentions just the BPSS, the basic security standard for the users, but you may need to go down some additional detail for the staff that are working on the project. Okay. That's about all I've got to say at the moment, but happy to discuss this in a lot more details. There are a lot of examples of tender questionnaires that we have. There are a lot more out there as well. There is actually some advice both on NCSC's National Computer Security Centre's website, but we also have some links as well to other ones on our website if it's something that you want to follow up on. I think we do have one question though, I can see. I'm getting nods from the host. Oh, I get two questions now.
Yeah, you have two there, Kevin. So you can answer them live if you like.
Okay, the cloud security alliance. So Tom's question here: what are the thoughts about using CAIQ as a generic method of responding to vendor assessments? The problem with all of these types of models, and you've probably all seen this yourself with tender documents, because the thing is as well, as with most tender questions, you prepare a whole set of boilerplate text that you can use in these environments, and it never quite fits the question that they want. It's unfortunate that you can't easily respond to things. Anything that helps build it, and helps build your responses, or a centralized repository, shall we say, of those sorts of responses, which can be used by multiple sources, such as this assessment initiative, I agree is very useful. The one like this that we have some experience of is in the automotive industry, based out of Germany, is the TISAC standard, which is basically you fill in a whole set of questions around how you deal with their data, and particularly because it's automotive, how you deal with research and prototyping, etc. things in the automotive industry, which is lodged in a central resource, then assessed by an approved TISAC auditor, so that companies can go there and just pick that up as one sort of central repository of all those answers, to save you having to do it 20 times. There is not a government equivalent, a UK government equivalent of that at the moment, and there certainly isn't a UK local government equivalent of it, although they have actually tried a couple of times. So somebody else has asked recently, we had a request for 27,001 certification rather than Cyber Essentials. Do you think that likely that it's becoming the norm? No, I don't think it's becoming the norm. A personal opinion is that Cyber Essentials isn't quite right for SaaS and cloud environments. So it is very difficult to respond to that, and a lot of stuff falls out of scope, which maybe shouldn't fall out of scope for Cyber Essentials when you're using externally and cloud-based services to provide the service to your end customer. Be aware as well that the 27,001 is in the middle of being rewritten and in late draft at the moment, as far as that being better able to cope with cloud and SaaS-based environments. So there is a movement in those standards Will it become 27,001 for all government? No, I very much doubt it. It might be for some commercial environments. I think there is a lot more pressure to have data protection covered in these tender documents. And I'll be honest, one of the other big things that we've seen coming through on a lot of tenders now is also to include whatever service you're providing, certainly for a government department and a lot of local governments, is your sustainability plan or your net zero carbon emissions plan to be an additional document that's totally outside of cybersecurity, but it's just what we're seeing offered at the moment. So we have another question for me. Any advice on international tenders? Sorry, I'm not quite sure where to start with that. Right, international tenders, yes, you need to have the same level of cybersecurity policy and data protection involved. Obviously, the data protection articles that it needs to cover must be relevant to wherever the environment is that you're doing the business, but it's relevant where the data is being stored. So if you are processing data from an organization who are based in another country, unfortunately, you need to take into account both that country's data protection laws and the UK data protection laws, assuming you're handling the data in the UK. So it can get more difficult, but the international level standards like 27001, like Cloud Security Alliance, the CSA ones, etc., and things like that, because they're international, will cover any of those sorts of tenders.
You also have a question in the chat from Marcus, if you can see that, Kevin.
Sorry, moved on screen.
I can read it out for you if that's easy.
Yes, please, because I can't find it.
So Marcus has asked, is your experience that ISO 27001 certification allows bidders to bypass having to complete a full security questionnaire response in tenders, or is a full detailed response normally needed as well?
Unfortunately, normally a full detailed response is needed as well. Yes, you can be lucky. Sometimes you get the first question is, do you have some form of certification? And if that's the case, sometimes they say you can now go to question 12 or go straight past this section or whatever. It may well be that they will ask you, yes, you can say you're certified. They may well ask you for the scope of whatever your certification is. And then you can very often skip. But I'll be honest, most of the ones that we've seen, yes, you can tick the box and say you've got certification. Unfortunately, they will ask a level of questions very often as well. So it needs, you can extract elements out of your 27 responses to be able to build that response. But unfortunately, it's rare, we've seen from ours, the ones that we get involved in, to have a box that just ticks and means you can zoom straight past everything.
Okay. So we have still got a few more slides left. So if anybody's got any more questions, please feel free to put it through and we'll answer them again at the very end. Hopefully those answers answered all your questions. So we are just going to go over click and protect. So I'll let you do that, Kevin.
Right, thank you. Yes, the a service that we just want to mention, we have a sub-brand called Click and Protect, which is basically security expertise on a subscription basis. So that for things like tenders, if you just need some input, a couple of hours input to help address some questions, or if you have a particular part of a security design for a solution that you need somebody to take an independent view of. So rather than hiring somebody in for days and days, you can have this subscription-based service, and then we can do just a few hours for you. And basically how that's built is you get 3 hours a month included, and they can roll over if you need them. It means you've always got somebody available with a level of skills to help for things like we've said, supplier assessment questionnaires, tender documents, or data protection questions. One of the things we get asked for quite often is with tender documents is help in answering the questions around data protection, or help getting certifications and things like that. But the principle is that you have that there and available as a call-up service to be able to help you address those questions quickly, or help you solve that problem quickly. And then, and say, if you don't use them, the hours will roll over. And if we get to a certain level of it, we can maybe do some security awareness assistance for you and things like that. But it's just the ability to have somebody available as and when those questions come up, without worrying about, one, either having to go and find somebody, or two, ending up with a large consultancy with the thousands of pounds a day type scenarios. But besides that, if I just leave you with our information page, as I say, we will make these slides available. There are some other links as well on the website to some of the areas that I've mentioned. And one of the outcomes of this as well is I'm going to take some of this and turn it into one of our blogs that we'll have on the website as well, to be able to give you a bit more detail.
Okay, thank you, Kevin. So if you have got any more questions, as I've not had any through, you can email us or tweet us. Our details are there on the slide, like Kevin's just said. So thank you everyone for attending. Hopefully you took something away from it. Like I said, this will be available soon on our website, and I will email everyone with the details. So thank you again.
Thank you all.